Good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock on the dot. The systems programmer in me tells me I should be starting now, but the experienced chairman knows that we'll probably get at least double the participants logging on in the next 5 minutes. So I'll just introduce myself and do the quick GSE sprawl. This is the first event for the CICS stream. Hopefully some of you have seen some of the keynote speakers already in this 2021 virtual conference. I'm Rob Stroud, chairman of the CICS stream at GSE. It's our kickoff session today. We're very lucky to have Mark Cocker here from Hursley, who's going to give us the overall update and state of the nation. And without further ado, Mark, you're off mute now. I'm going to hand it over to you to present. I'll keep an eye on the chat if there are any questions, because most people are on mute. And I believe at the end, we're going to try and have a question and answer session anyway. So if anyone wants to keep their questions to the end, that's fine. But if you want to ask at any time, Mark's quite happy to answer questions. I'll just have to spot them in the chat and prompt him. So take it away, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rob, and thank you to the GSE team for inviting me to the UK conference. Hope everyone's well. I know it's difficult times at the moment, and we're all looking forward to perhaps next year meeting up in person. As Rob said, my name is Mark Cocker. I'm the product manager for CICS. So I work alongside our team in Hursley, down in Hampshire. Working with lots of our customers and looking to the future, and hopefully this session here will summarize some of the updates we got from the CICS lab over the last 12 months or so since the last conference that we've had. So I've worked in the CICS team for 30 years nearly, in various roles in development, service, beta management, strategy, and so on. Since I've perhaps been to the GSE in the past, I'm now the product manager. So feel free to contact me about anything to do with CICS, really, that you want to talk about. So there are lots of links throughout this presentation, because I appreciate, we've only got so much time here, and you may be interested in more details. So the actual presentation materials available on the site, and obviously when you've got that, you can click through to more details. As Rob said, feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I've left enough time at the end for questions. And of course, if you have any questions after the session, you can contact me via the email on the front slide there. Okay, so onto the agenda, really. So there's a few areas I thought would be useful to go through this time round. One is a quick summary of 5.6. I know that's been out now, but I think a number of our customers tend to hear the flurry of material as a product is announced, and then perhaps they get back to their day jobs and they start to think about upgrading a year or two afterwards. So I thought I'd give a quick summary of 5.6 and the continuous delivery approach, because as you may be aware, the CICS team are busy releasing new capability on the latest 5.6 release as we go, rather than sort of stocking it all up for the later release. And I'll talk about the approach we have and why we do that. I'll then give an overview of where we are with the open beta. This is the not so best kept secret for the the CICS team working on the next release. There are no promises, obviously, when we introduce content in the beta, but with the very tight engagement that we have with customers these days, we like to release early and often, and allow those customers who want a deeper insight into what we're doing, and particularly to be able to read documentation, to test out on their machines and so on, that early access. So I think we're very open about what we're doing now as we go into the future. And the open beta, you may have seen through a few announcements, is the embodiment of what's coming next. So we'll go through that. And then we've been also working on how we can engage with our community to help each other out, especially with, raising awareness with new capability. And we've got a sort of various different regular conferences like the Technical Exchange and podcasts and other things going on. So I thought I'd raise awareness to some of that. And then, as I say, I wanted to allow time for Q&A as we go, especially as there are quite a few other deeper dive sessions in the CICS track. You may have more general questions about CICS. So we've got Nick Garrett from our team, and there may be others as well on this session, and I'll quite happily field anything beyond this particular material that we've got here. So let's dive straight in then. Hopefully you're fairly familiar with what CICS Transaction Server is, but we have been engaging with quite a few customers where they've been bringing new people on board over the last few years. We ourselves have been having lots of new hires into the CICS development team. And so there's never a harm in just a gentle reminder what CICS is all about, especially as things do change over time. And time, as the first sentence says there, is, CICS is now over 50 years old. And it's really positioned these days as being a very powerful mixed language application server. So beyond the typical transactions that you may have understood from the past, maybe a back-end device like a teller device, or at the end of an ATM, CICS is very much an application server. So it's in the middle of workloads, inbound, outbound APIs, all that sort of stuff. And the idea is that CICS can host applications, and the core value really is that we have a shared programming context for applications. So that embodies things like transactionality, i.e. the ability to update multiple resources with backout and failure scenarios taken into account by the actual infrastructure. Security, monitoring, management, and hosting multiple languages. So as I'm sure we're all aware, languages have changed over time in their popularity, but a few core languages keep going strong. And the languages that we host in CICS now covers quite a wide variety, from the traditional COBOL, PL1, C, C++, assembler, through to the more recent Java and Node platforms. And as is mentioned here, the actual, when we say Java, that's not only the base JVM, but then a number of frameworks and APIs on top of that, like Jakarta, Spring Boot, Eclipse Microprofile. And indeed, Node brings a lot of frameworks for hosting various different web APIs, dashboards, all that sort of thing. So we do cover quite a gamut that gives developers a choice of what to write their applications in, and also to pick the right language for that business application. So whether it's an API, a dashboard, or core, business logic, updating data against DB2, or messaging, those sorts of things. So, and the last bit here really is about CICS really utilizing the power of the IBM Z and the ZOS platform. So that means every time we have changes and a new capability in the hardware and software, the CICS team are working with others across IBM to look at how we can make use of that in an efficient manner for the typical workloads that we host. So, to some extent, we're trying to do the heavy lifting, and give your applications, I wouldn't say a day off, but give them the ability to focus on the core business logic rather than all the extra things that you have to worry about with very important workloads that are running in your organizations. So continuous delivery then, and I thought it'd be useful just to summarize the approach that we have, because other products do take different approaches. We thought long and hard about this when we first started doing it in, I don't know, about CICS 5.3 or so. So the idea is that we have new capability that we usually develop in the next release, so the open beta in this case. And when we identify, that new piece of function, we also look for opportunities to backport it to the latest CD release, which would be 5.6 at the moment. And we do that by creating a separate APAR for each of those capabilities. And that gives customers the flexibility to apply those APARs as and when they normally do for their service, or indeed to kind of decide that actually they want that capability more quickly, and just to target the specific APAR that they need. And it also means that in some cases we're able to backport further, but typically we do only backport to the latest release to give those on older releases, perhaps some more stability in the sheer number of APARs that they need to apply. And also the CICS Explorer is included in this, so we do add new features to the Explorer, and that has a service stream that those new features are added to. So you only need to go to the Explorer, look for updates, and then there may well be new capability in amongst code fixes. So to compare that then with the open beta, that is obviously our next release, as I mentioned, and that includes all the fixes from the previous releases that are upstreamed. And then occasionally there are some features that we can't backport or we're in the middle of developing. So those are unique to the open beta. And in those cases, if there are things that are disruptive or presenting APIs that can't be backported for one reason or another, sometimes it's just sheer disruption to our vendors and their business partner, kind of products that they may produce. And in other cases, we don't want to be disruptive to customers in changing any behavior. So we tend to do those more disruptive things at a release boundary, where customers tend to, plan more testing, for example, just to make sure the behaviors are as expected. And as I say, we also have the Explorer including that. So along in the open beta is an open beta version of the Explorer. And then our new releases typically every 1.5 to 2 years. And we have 3 editions of the product. So the MLC version that most of our customers use, there's a value unit edition version, which is a one-time charge, and then a subscription support on top of that, and the developer trial version that is free to use, and is there to help customers experiment with what's coming up next without perhaps going through the whole ordering process for a CICS product. So maybe they want to, for example, practice installing the release. And then we have a life cycle, which is typically at least 5 years, but typically is 7 or so years before we then announce the end of support. And then customers can choose to have extended support for up to 3 years on a paid for contract. But most of our customers tend to upgrade within that time frame anyway. And then also just to make you aware that we have it's not just the product itself these days, but we have a number of capabilities that release outside of the product. So these include things like the Ansible collection and plugins for Maven, Gradle, UCD, the Zoe CLI. We've got a build toolkit to allow you to assemble projects into CICS bundles. And then we have a new resource builder actually, which I'll mention later on, which allows you to define CICS resources in YAML files, and then produce a DFH-CSD-UP stream that you can then update the CSD from that, which is a great new capability. It's still in beta, but is available if you want to play with it as part of that beta program. And then we do regular announcements. So, if you want to keep abreast of what's going on, do feel free to keep up with those. So this is really just a set of links to help you, navigate to some of that new content. So I'm not going to go through this. There is the what's new topic, which is a really good summary. So if you want to hear or want to read, it's grouped into various topics. So, it's a easy read, if you like. It's just short summaries of all the new capabilities with links into the details. And then if you're upgrading, we've got changes between the releases, which is a nice sort of tabular form of all the changes from set parameters through to APIs and monitoring field changes and all that sort of stuff. And then later this month, we'll have our next continuous delivery announcement. At least that's the plan at the moment. Plans change, but the plan is probably around mid to end of November. So just to kick off then with some of these, as I say, are just a summary of 5, 6. I'll just blast through a few of them that I think are particularly interesting. So the CICS policies has been a great capability that we added in the early parts of version 5 to allow you to efficiently monitor the status of systems or tasks and then take automated action from. So, a typical kind of policy may look for a resource state, like a DB control or an MQ connection status or a pipeline status. And then if that status changes to something you're not happy with, like it goes disabled, then you can kick off a transaction, issue a message, fire an event, or do some other automation in your automation suite based on an event, a message that is outputted. And we've been, enhancing that area ever since. So one of the features in version 5 is to be able to change the WLM health of the CICS region based on the status changes, if you like, that are in the policy. So you can set the WLM health to 100, which means everything's tickety-boo, and workload can be processed in or directed to and processed in that CICS region, or you can set it to something less than the 100. And other regions which have higher WLM health status will then start to have that workload navigated to them. So if you do end up in situations where maybe a DB controller, an MQ queue, for example, that you rely on is unavailable, then you can steer workload away from that region to hopefully another region that is healthy. We've been adding messages to help with things like short-on storage. In this case, for ZOS storage that's obtained in that CICS region, which is particularly for things like TCBs, but also things like JVM servers. Do use some 24-bit storage, so we've been having messages so you're aware of that. We've been working with the ZOS workload interaction correlator, which is a product to take in the sort of more up-to-date statistics of the CICS region and the workload that's going on in there. So every 5 seconds or so, it sucks data in to that product, and is especially useful for dashboards that may need to monitor on a more critical granular level than perhaps other products. And we've been updating our upgrade guide and the process documentation around that, and we've had our teams really write that documentation from scratch based on their experience, and that hopefully can really help customers as they do that upgrade process, because someone's been through it soup to nuts recently, and distilled it down into more everyday advice that helps in those upgrading tasks. We've been doing some things like web service enhancements. They sort of, especially around handling HTTP option verbs that come in over the CICS web interface, so that we can now drive a user replaceable module to handle those, and some workloads or some clients need that in order to be aware of the capabilities of the server they're interacting with before they actually send in requests. And we support RACF generated JWT tokens for multi-factor authentication scenarios, but be aware that those are only those issued by RACF, so not those issued from other platforms. We're certainly looking at those scenarios later on. And also, just to make you aware that we've got a couple of other sessions this conference around the foundation and CICS security, and they're focused, well, they're going to provide a lot more details in these areas. So I'm not going to sort of talk about those in much more detail here. There are also some enhancements around enhancing our temporary storage capability. So we now issue messages when the temporary storage queue is approaching its capacity, and that through automation can allow you to then take some automated actions based on that before a queue fills up and then an application just falls over. You can start to be aware of it. We've got some more policy work, which John will talk about during the foundation session. And then we've got a new capability only recently announced called resource definition overrides. So that was part of our CD drop in January this year. And we've got another session specifically on that. But just to give you a rough idea, so the idea is that when you've got resources being installed into CICS, wherever they are installed from, so it could be from a CSD via the SPI, those resources may have attributes that are very particular to an environment, so maybe development, test, or production. And if you want to install resources in a different environment, they may need attributes, for example, that have a different naming convention, or point to a different data set, something like that. So resource overrides allows you to define a YAML file, which CICS reads when it starts up, and based on the definitions in that YAML file, CICS will look for certain resources and certain attributes and transpose or replace or process those attributes with different attributes or different characteristics. So the idea is that you can use the resources that you define for production, you can use in earlier stages and use overrides to say, actually, instead of referring to a production data set, here's a resource overrides file that will point you to, a data set that's suitable for development or test. And that means you can use exactly the same resources in those different environments from a kind of CSD point of view. But this resource overrides file allows them to be tailored to the environment in which they're actually being installed in. So the CSD itself is exactly the same. It can be, binary, the same file, or a copy, of course, but it lowers the amount of administration because there are less resources to be defining because, you know, generic symbolic overrides are defined in this overrides file. So as I say, it's a very interesting area to possibly lower your administration costs and efforts. So do look out for that session on Tuesday next week. And then we've had some later announcements on the right-hand side here in April around increasing capacity for the BAS data space storage, especially for some of those on the call. They've got large CPSM BAS definitions, and that can help in those scenarios. Many of our customers tend to use shared CSDs, but there are particular use cases where BAS is very useful, and in some cases being used to a very great extent. The next item there about passing the XID to DB2. So this is a new capability where CICS does exactly what it says, passes an XID token that's passed into CICS, pass it on to DB2, and then DB2 can then use that to share locks really between threads that pass in the same XID. So for example, if a batch job calls into DB2 with an XID and then links to, and then holds those locks, and then links to a CICS program, which also goes into DB2 with the same XID, then that SQL command in CICS can successfully access the same shared locks and process potentially the same data. And then that unit of work can be committed together potentially. So this is, allows interaction between, if you like, batch and different subsystems going into the same database, and without deadlocking, components within that distributed, if you like, work. And then we've been enhancing. Well, we've been passing our adaptive tracking information from CICS over to DB2, and this can help with diagnostics of issues in that when you're looking at DB2 information, you can trace back to where the workload came into the CICS environment for a particular request into DB2, which means you can do it's easier to point the finger, if you like, at the application that potentially sent in some bad SQL or something like that. And then we've got some additional policy enhancements around containers. So CICS containers, that are used within a CICS application. You can now set up a task rule to say, if the application attempts to obtain a lot of storage in containers, you can start to issue messages or append the task itself. And then from a application development side, we've been doing a lot for the Java applications. So some of this really stems from the number of customers who are now seeing their skills for application development in general. The people entering the workforce have a different skill set. Sure, if they're software engineers, they can certainly learn and do learn multiple languages, but sometimes it's a matter of helping developers use languages they're familiar with in order for them to be productive from day one, and also to use APIs and frameworks that help them to deliver a solution at a faster pace and potentially that are multi-platform. So they can develop and test on a distributed system, perhaps even run the workload on other systems, but then also potentially port that application and run it in CICS. And Java is a great bastion of one of those languages that is highly portable. Those are the one of the core reasons why Java was developed, of course, to be cross-platform between mobile phone devices and laptops at the time, but it equally figures into cloud workloads and the mainframe these days. So we've been looking at how to onboard those developers into the CICS space. Whilst Java is, as I say, cross-platform, there are sometimes things like packaging, things like testing that they need to get involved with, which are specific to CICS. So, for example, putting your application into a CICS bundle, if it's an OSGI application or a Liberty application, that may be one thing they want to do. And so we've really produced some material now for a getting started guide in the CICS documentation that is available now. And it really is like a fast start, if you like, for those developers, just to get the bits and pieces they need to know about the CICS environment without swamping them with lots of heavyweight information about tasks and transactions and append codes and so on, to give them a more light touch that they can perhaps get going and then find those things out and discover what they need to as they're working. So look out for that. We've also been along the same lines, really, going into the types of the spaces where those developers typically frequent. So things like IBM Developer is a website which has lots of material for Java development and cloud development, things like that. And we've been putting up new articles in those sort of locations around things like Spring Boot and Jakarta and OSGI to help them become aware that CICS is a platform that can run their applications, and also potentially, as I mentioned, those nuances. And Phil is doing a session later this week on that. And so the point here is that in 5.6, we now support Spring Boot as a platform to run within the Liberty JVM server. So that brings a whole swathe of types of applications that can run in CICS. So Spring Boot was really if you like, an early competitor to what was Java Enterprise Edition at the time, because a number of developers felt that Java EE APIs weren't moving fast enough, and they wanted to be able to package applications with all their dependencies into one single executable, typically for ease of distribution, especially in things like cloud environments. And so that packaging and sets of APIs were known as the Spring framework, and alongside that was Spring Boot, which was that sort of pile it all into one executable kind of, and that's supported by Liberty. We've done the testing to make sure those applications work running CICS as well. So they're supported in 5.6. Jakarta EE8 is analogous really to Java EE8, but moving over to the naming conventions for Jakarta. And as we go into the future, we'll be looking to support later releases of Jakarta. We've been doing enhancements to the CICS Java APIs. So these are the core APIs a Java developer can use to call CICS services. And we've been enhancing those to allow calling of other CICS programs to be prepared and executed not only in the CICS environment, but those same APIs can be remotable now and run on your desktop. So you can be coding on your desktop, run the application on your desktop, and it can prepare an exec CICS command with containers. And then when it goes to actually execute that link, it will remotely access the CICS region, perform the link, come back with a response, and then you can carry on in your desktop to, for example, stepwise debug your application. You can then make hot changes in, so you can literally modify your source, save that source, and it can push it into that JVM, and you can be running that new source directly without even restarting the application. So all of those things are possible, and help the productivity of developers. And to allow those developers to build and deploy their applications, we have some new capability also with the build tools for Maven and Gradle, and we've also been placing the CICS APIs and other componentry for things like resolving dependencies at a particular API level, those sorts of things, onto Maven Central. So that gives Java developers a nice whole build tool, whole development and build framework for applications that are going to be deployed to CICS. Okay, so we've also been enhancing the CICS API to simplify bundle deployment, and this means that this is not just for Java, but Java is one of those scenarios. So you can actually take a built CICS bundle and call an API to actually deploy into CICS. So there's a service that's hosted in the JVM server in CICS, in a CMCI JVM server in CICS, and you can publish a built CICS bundle to that API, and CICS will accept that bundle over the API, write it to disk, and then define and install a resource to actually install that bundle. And that links up with the new build tools in Maven and Gradle that can then not only package your Java application in a bundle, but then actually deploy it into a CICS region ready for testing, all as one automated steps that you set up once, and then just automatically runs within literally seconds. So that gives them a round tripping that's very fast. So COM areas have been limited to 32K within a CICS region, but if you go between CICS regions, it's actually less than that. In theory, we document that it can be as low as 24K, and it depends on what else is appended to that COM area by CICS itself. But now we've increased that to a 32K limit, even in between CICS regions, and we do that by when that limit is breached, or rather, when you are in that 24K to 32K kind of size, we copy that information into a container, and then do the link to the remote region, and it's unpackaged and obviously still is a COM area at the other end of it. So that means we kind of bypass the limitation, and now you can use up to 32K even between CICS regions. And that's important if you want to move CICS programs around between regions, perhaps for performance reasons, or scaling reasons, or indeed high availability. If they were local in the CICS region and then you moved them to another region, if they suddenly had a different limitation in size, that would obviously cause problems. As I mentioned, we supported Node for a few releases, but we've updated to Node 14, and it won't be a surprise to anyone that we're going to continue that effort to support later releases of Node as and when they're released by IBM. So that effort's going to carry on, but Node 14 is the latest from IBM at the moment. I mentioned that we provide a Zoe CLI plugin for deploying Node applications, and there's another session on CICS and Zoe, sort of using Zoe in the combination with CICS, if you like. But this particular CLI is really designed to allow you to package a Node application resolve dependencies on ZOS, because some of those dependencies may be native and they need to be compiled on ZOS using typically a C compiler. That's part of the Node product. So there's some, if you like, special requirements for deploying Node applications, and this plugin automates that to give good productivity for front-end developers using Node. And we've tested the UCD plugin for CICS 5.6. So I just want to spend maybe a couple of seconds on upgrading, just to say, if you're not already on 5.6, as you will have heard, there's lots of new content and more to come in the CD stream. So do consider upgrading. There's lots of advantages, and it kind of positions you well for the future. If you have any concerns or questions about upgrading, just let me know. And we've also released an Ansible CICS collection this year. I think it was around March, April timeframe. So I just wanted to raise awareness, and we've got another session on Ansible in the CICS stream as well, which Stu Francis is going to give. So again, I'm not going to go into the detail, but just to kind of whet your appetite. So Ansible is an automation tool, and it's really designed around provisioning infrastructure. Especially, it's been used for things like cloud deployments, configuration management. So when you deploy new infrastructure, you then need to configure it. So, it's good for that as well. And then finally, once that environment is ready for actually deploying applications. So that combination of things, Ansible is particularly good at. It's used heavily in the industry. So there's quite a few people with Ansible skills. And they have these things called playbooks that allow you to create repeatable tasks. So it's not like scripting, but it's more definition writing than scripting. But you can basically put together a series of steps where you want to achieve a certain goal, which can then be repeated across many different systems. So the typical kind of patterns that they use for on the right there are things like system provisioning, installing applications, etc. And you can see how on ZOS we have all of these requirements. It's just there are different products and different nuances on Z than in other environments. But imagine a set of tasks that could be defined in Ansible, and then achieve these things without having to have people manually go through and do them. So things like managing users and certificates, that has to be done on every platform. But sometimes on Z, people end up writing a bit of rec script or their own homegrown automation to do that. So the real idea here is that if we can have a central collection of Ansible tasks that are useful for doing these types of things, then they can be provided by IBM, work out of the box in many cases, or indeed customers or vendors can create them or share them, and it'll make everyone's life a lot easier. So from a CICS context point of view, there are a number of collections for different components on ZOS. So there's core collections, IMS collections, DB2, etc. There is also now a CICS collection, and this CICS collection allows you to create tasks within a playbook that can perform anything that the CMCI can do. So you can you can define resources, you can perform actions, you can update resources. So perhaps to help you think about it, if you're familiar with the CICS Explorer, which also uses the CMCI, anything you can do in Explorer, you could practically write an Ansible task using this collection to do as well. So whether that's just find out what's going on, what are the state of certain resources, define new resources, change the state of those resources, delete those resources, that sort of thing, or indeed perform actions on the system, like performing a shutdown, or any kind of system related command, or looking at SIP parameters, those sorts of things. And there's a series of examples, for example, deploying a CICS program and performing a new copy, life cycling resources, getting a report of some of the resources installed in that CICS region, those sorts of things. That could be useful for audits and as well as actually performing actions. So do look out for that. It's a very interesting topic, and we have lots of customers looking at this at the moment. So to highlight some of the items in the open beta, I realize for some people, beta implies unfinished code, going to be lots of problems. Why would I bother? But sometimes it's good to just keep an eye on the future to see where things are going. Granted, not many people want to actually run the beta code, but just getting that awareness of what's coming down the pike will help potentially you be prepared for it, and to take advantage of it sooner than perhaps you would otherwise be. So this beta program we've been running now for several releases, and it's really a culmination of the many and varied pieces of work we do with customers, from the CICS design partnership through RFE requests that are raised, that we come together with a plan and a set of things that we're going to do. So you can join this beta programs free of charge. We have education sessions to help you understand what's new. And we obviously, do this to encourage you to give us some feedback. So please, consider joining it and trying it out. Perhaps even just look at the documentation, which is on the IBM documentation site. So, okay, these are just some links. So I thought I'd talk about some of the new items that we have. So one item that we've announced is what we refer to as the resource builder. So this allows you to create a pipeline where your CICS developers can define the application resources alongside their actual application code. So if you imagine a pipeline where it has your source code management, perhaps Git, just as an example, you've got your application source in there. You also have a new YAML file which defines the resources that application needs at runtime. So not necessarily all the resources for the CICS region. So it's not just a pure copy of your whole CSD. It is just the resources that application needs. So it could be URI maps, program definitions, transaction definitions, TSQ models, those sorts of things. So, and the idea then is once you have that source application, that source YAML file, this resource builder can then validate that YAML file and produce a CSD update stream that can be used within a pipeline, and that update stream can then be used to update a CSD as part of that deployment for the application. And this allows your developers to have a lot closer interaction, perhaps define new resources themselves. There are lots of checks and balances involved here. The system programmer can set up models. It can set up restrictions about what can be defined, what resources what types of resources, or indeed what attributes in those resources. You can define models per application for things like naming conventions. So there's a lot to what I've just said, but the end result is instead of the developer having to work closely with the systems programmer, perhaps raising tickets, sending emails, phone calls, discussions, deploying the application, then finding it doesn't work because the resource is not there, then going back and redeploying it. you go to more of a configuration as code model, and then everyone, including the systems programmer and developers, and there may be a team of developers, can then scrutinize those resource definitions, perhaps approve them before they get deployed, of course. Automation can make additional checks. And then that whole pipeline becomes automated. That's not to say there's no scrutiny. It just means when everyone has scrutinized it and is happy, and the Git commits are placed into that repository, automation can then pick up and do all the menial tasks of doing that deployment. So that's a very exciting area for us. There's been quite a few customers who are trying to reach that lofty goal of a thoroughly automated pipeline, not only to build the application, but to deploy it between multiple environments. So another area we've been looking at is supporting Java annotations. So if you're writing a Java application and wanting to declare a new method that can be called by, say, a COBOL program, typically you'd have to define a program resource for that OSGI application, and then you have to specify the exact method signature for the class that's going to be called. Sorry, not method signature, just the class definition. Whereas now a Java developer can declare using a declaration annotation within his source code the methods that he wants to be called. And then when that OSGI application is installed, the program definition can be automatically installed by CICS, because we do annotation scanning at installation. And if we find those annotations, we define the resources, and it can be then called by another program. So that just moves the burden from a systems programmer, being aware and having to define program resources through to a simple annotation for the Java programmer, which, if deployed to other environments will be just ignored, but when installed into CICS, we can pick up and do the right thing. And the CMCR JVM server I mentioned earlier, today is supported in a CPSM web user interface WUI server, and we've now are going to be supporting that inside a single CICS region, and that means there's lots of goodnesses that come with the CICS Explorer being able to connect to that JVM server inside a single region if you're not using CPSM infrastructure. So you can do things like aggregation that relies on GraphQL. You can do things like bundle deployment that relies on the new API I talked about, and it also relies potentially, if you want to use multi-factor authentication for that CMCR JVM server as well. So yeah, so those people who are not using CPSM can now start to use some of those new capabilities even in a single region. Just looking at the time, so I'm not going to go through all of these items. Also, I mentioned there's a security session by Colin later in the week, and he's literally going to be going through all of these items. So this is really just, I'll pass on describing these here, but needless to say, we've had a large effort in this next release of CICS to tidy up some of the documentation. We've, to some extent, completely rewritten some of the documentation to make it more approachable, understandable, get the right terminology in place, those sorts of things, as well as use a lot more diagrams and really base it on scenarios which customers are likely to be wanting to set up, so they can get going quicker, and people who are new to CICS can be a lot more familiar and indeed set up the right security first time, rather than edging closer and closer to the security they wanted in the first place, but couldn't quite find their way, to fight through the documentation to know what to do. So as I say, I'll leave these for Colin to talk about in his session. And then another item I want to talk about here was something called region tagging. So one of the capabilities that is going to be used quite broadly in CICS for a number of different things is the ability to, in essence, create a tag for your CICS region or multiple tags to then use in other, other scenarios. So, for example, you could tag a CICS region as production or development or test. You could also tag the CICS region as insurance, banking, or something else. So you can have application level tagging, tags that describe the system itself or the environment in which it's running. And the idea is then once that CICS region knows that set of tags, we can then use it in things like defining which health checks run for production, because you may want a fewer number of health checks running for development systems that may not have quite the right security, but of course it may not matter because you're not running production workloads on there. So you may want to say, I want these security health checks run, well, I want all of them in production, but I only want this subset in development or test. Because, and again, some of your test regions may deliberately be set up with security that's not appropriate for production in order to test those, kind of environments. So region tagging is going to be used for quite a few things. One of the first things is for things like filtering on health checks, but you can see the potential there for lots of different scenarios. To filter on information to, for example, in Explorer, it will be nice to say, just show me all the CICS regions that are production, rather than, have maybe a complex naming convention that implies that, or a certain set of CICS systems groups. You can actually rely on region tagging. And so if you like, it's a bit more opt-in than definition based. So again, John Tilling's going to be talking about all of these things in his session tomorrow, I believe. So yeah, I'll skip past those. And the last couple of minutes, I'll just talk about some community resources that we've got. GitHub is a location that we're putting all of our samples now. And we welcome contributions from others as well. If you have some CICS applications or fragments of code that you think will be good to share with others in the community, we welcome those contributions. We cover a number of different languages in there, and it's really just as we're introducing new technology, we tend to put together samples and then put them on GitHub for everyone to either see how to create or use that technology, or indeed have a kind of starting set or something that works that gets them going quickly. So that's everything from around applications through to events, policies, and bundles. And then, as I mentioned, we also have got a number of articles on IBM Developer. So we've got a couple of series on OSGI and Spring Boot. And then Nick has started a great set of podcasts, and the first few of that are CICS relevant are up there. But there's many different podcasts, so please feel free to enjoy those. It's sometimes nice just to listen in the background, with some of the IBM team who are very familiar with CICS and CICS applications and deployments. And I think Rosalind Ratcliffe's got sessions, podcast sessions up there as well. And then we have a community page on the IBM Z and Linux One. So there's a CICS group there. We've got lots of short articles and discussions. And we tend to put our announcements up there now for things like the CICS Technical Exchange event. But if you want to contribute your own Q&A, the CICS team do monitor that. So we'd be happy to kind of answer your questions in there. we also, of course, monitor CICS and those sort of forums. So with that, I was really, I said I was going to allow time for questions, but we're actually dead on time. So,
and you were worried you didn't have enough, weren't you?
I know. Well,
we've got one question on the chat. Thanks very much to Rich, who saved my bacon at the last minute because there were none. But he's asked, Mark, can you provide a time frame for CICS 6.1 announcement or availability?
It's very likely to be in the first half of next year. We are looking to coordinate our announcements for 6.1 with other IBM hardware and software announcements that are going on, because we have use cases that that, if you like, cross-pollinate multiple products and hardware. So our exact date is being dictated a little bit by others. I'm guessing a number of people on the call will appreciate how that feels. So yes, within the first half. I can't be more accurate at the moment because you know, we're relying on other teams, which is the way things are at the moment. Yeah,
I know that's a good question, Rich. I was probably a little bit aware of that one, but I'm looking to take 6.1, Rich, and I'm planning for the middle of next year. But that's my plan at the moment, subject to IBM announcements. Anybody else got any questions? What I'm going to try and do is just give you all the ability to unmute yourself if you want to. If you want to ask a question, you should be able to unmute now. And if you're frustrated and can't do that, then do accept my apologies, because this is an experiment for this year.
Also, okay. I put up a little advert there to say we've got a general Q&A as part of the CICS stream, which Nick is hosting. So you know, you can also I'll be along to that. So if you have any questions you think of afterwards, I can answer it then.
Yeah, that's a good plug, Mark. Certainly, I'd like to encourage everybody to think of all those awkward questions that you've been holding on to for the panel. I'll certainly be trying to think of at least one myself that's awkward, but hopefully we'll get some interactions. That's new for this year as well. We've had good numbers again, and we're well subscribed for this one, but we've eaten into our break time now. So Mark, I'm going to thank you for your presentation and your time. Everybody else, thank you for your time. See you tomorrow back on the CICS stream. Or indeed in any of the sessions that you might dial into now. Thanks very much indeed. Cheers, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye.